Hello, my beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I am so blessed because I love the work that I get to do in the world. And you might wonder what an angelic practitioner does. So I offer one-on-one angel sessions, which are wonderful. They take place over the phone. They're an hour long. We start by calling in the light, calling in the angels, and then we start having a heartfelt conversation. And I'll channel for you and pull some oracle cards for you. And my intention is for you to connect with your divine guidance. So it's not only about bringing in wisdom and guidance from the angels, but it is helping you to attune to your divine wisdom. I also offer more long-form support that I call soul mentoring, where we can meet weekly as the angels and I support you as you go through a time of growth or healing or transformation. And then I also offer a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. I offer a new class about every 6 weeks or so. So you can visit my website, illuminatingsouls.com, and sign up for my mailing list. And then you will be in the know about all that I have coming up. In the meanwhile, the angels and I are here to help you come into a place of replenishment and rest, to help you connect with the waves of divine love that are here for you. And I am so deeply grateful for this time together. This podcast is born of two of my favorite forms of self-care that I rely upon all the time. The first being angels. I love angels. When I started opening to this connection with the angels back around 2000, I found it to be so transformative because there is something about experiencing this divine love that brings in profound healing and has supported me in building a solid foundation for 3D life as well. So the angels are the first part of my self-care routine. And one of the other things that I use every single evening is listening to a sleep podcast. I've been doing this since about 2015 every night, and I have come to love them. There's a lot of them out there. I listen to a bunch of different ones, including my own. And I find there is something so soothing about listening to a quiet, lulling voice, sharing about whatever it is they're talking about, whether they're reading a story or sharing a story from their own life or something they've written. I just find that the rumbling, the rambling, the murmuring of a loving companion in the form of a sleep podcast helps to build a bridge between my waking consciousness and drifting off to sleep. it gives my mind something to focus on so that I'm not replaying whatever happened the day before. So my mind doesn't get busy. It just shifts focus to whatever it is I'm listening to. Last night, I listened to an episode from the podcast Get Sleepy, and the narrator, Thomas, was reading a story about a woman who was vacationing in the Welsh countryside. I think that's what it was about. I slept through most of it, but it was lovely. In the story, he shares about how she pulled up to the cottage she was renting and she brought in her groceries, and then she decided to order some delicious Indian food, and she took her dogs for a walk. Just all of these lovely images, just described in a sweet, soothing, sleepy tone. And I could focus on that just very gently until sleep found me. And so my hope is that this podcast can do the same for you. Each episode has 2 parts. The first part is the one we're in now, where I greet you and I share with you a little bit about the intention of the podcast, and we talk about some spiritual stuff. That sounds so official, right? Ooh, spiritual stuff. But something to inspire your heart. And I call in the angels. And this part is usually somewhere about 20 minutes or so. Sometimes it's a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. And then we move on to Storytime. Storytime runs about 40 minutes. I want each episode to be an hour for you, so you have plenty of time to drift off. And Storytime can be a number of different things. I might read to you from something that's in the public domain. That's what I'm going to do for you in this episode. I might share with you stories from my own life. I might flip through an old magazine with you. It might be a combination of all of those. But my intention is to be good company for you and help create this lovely sanctuary for sleep and rest and recharging. I do know that many of you listen during the daytime, during your waking hours, and so if I'm keeping you company as you go for a walk or go about your day, it's my honor to do that as well. And to those of you who are preparing for bed, I invite you to cozy on up and snuggle on in whatever way is most comfortable for you. I find it interesting that each of us has our own sleep style. I love lots of pillows, and the more blankets, the better. But now that it's warmer out, because it is summer here, I find that I have to use less blankets. I don't actually sleep as well. I like the heaviness of the blankets on me. And yes, I have tried weighted blankets and they don't work as well. There's something about them that is uncomfortable for me. But at this point we have the top sheet, a light blanket, and a comforter on the bed. So there are plenty of blankets. And so I love to have the end of the sheet and the blanket tucked in at the bottom of the bed. I know some people don't like to have blankets tucked in. And so I love curling on in at the end of the day. I do sleep with a body pillow. I've done that since I was a kid. So I always feel fortressed in by pillows, and that's very comforting for me. I'm about to take a short trip and I'll be driving in my car, and sometimes when I do that I take my body pillow with me and I'm contemplating, do I bring it? I think I should, yes, so I'll likely take it with me. So that's my way of sleeping. And I really support you in contemplating what creates the best sleep environment for you. And how can you gift that to yourself? Because creating a lovely, sweet space to go to sleep, I think, is one of the nicest forms of self-care we can give ourselves. So it would be my honor to be part of your beautiful sleep ritual. So as I record this, it is early morning. That is my preferred time to record these episodes because the world is quiet. And things feel rather still right now. And so I send you this beautiful energy of sweet stillness and quiet. And just breathe. And I'm going to invite the angels to be with us. They're already here, but I love sharing this ritual with you. So let's take another breath in and out as we gently call ourselves forward into the heart of God. And beautiful angels on high, I invite you to join us here. And I ask that you create a beautiful sanctuary of love, of healing, of sweetness, and of light for each of our beloveds who are listening to this message. And angels, I ask that you clear our energy fields through the heart of God, helping to clear from us anything that is not ours, releasing us from anything that feels heavier than it need be. Angels, I ask that you bring blessings of light and joy and goodness to each one of us. And dear ones, just breathe in and release. Just allowing yourself to come into this lovely cocoon of light. The visual I often receive as we bring the angels in is they bring to you this sphere of soft pink light. And this sphere is quite large in size and easily accommodates you and your bed and the room that you are in. And everything in this sphere receives this amplified transmission of love and light. And this sphere can expand to include your whole home. It can expand to also reach out to all of those that you love. And you just breathe. You know, we are both physical and vibrational beings. So when we allow ourselves time to bathe in the light, it's very supportive. So just allow every cell of your body, every thought in your mind, and every emotion in your heart to receive the love of your angels. Your angels have known you since before you were born. They have been supporting you through every breath of this lifetime. They are aware of all that is transpiring in your life and in your heart. And they are here now to love you. So your job is to simply receive. And the angels ask that you be gentle with yourself. You know, I think most of us have a tendency to be hard on ourselves because we perceive that we should be doing more or being more efficient, taking better care of ourselves, whatever that is, whatever your more is. And if you can, just bring that into the light and receive the sweetness and the goodness the angels bring to you now. There's a beautiful song by David Wilcox. He's a singer-songwriter, and I love him. I love his voice. I love his music. I love the themes of his music. And there's a song that he sings called Hold It Up to the Light. And in the song, he's talking about there's a decision on his path, and he doesn't know which way to turn. And the lyrics say something along the lines of, God, please bless this decision. My life's at stake. So I'll hold it up to the light. And I think how often in life we come to these places where we're not sure what to do next or which way to turn. And it's a reminder that we don't always need to know the answer right away. That sometimes the answer is to hold it up to the light and make space for the guidance and the wisdom to find us. You know, there's a difference between receiving wisdom and guidance through the mind, which, listen, is really helpful. If there is something 3D world that my mind needs to help me with, I am grateful my mind works that way. But sometimes, especially as we open to our spiritual gifts, I find that I am seeking understanding more from my knowingness than from my intellect. And these are those moments that I hold it up to the light and I allow the expansive wisdom of divine guidance to find me. So whatever's going on in your life right now that is working with you, hold it up to the light and breathe and allow your angels to support you and make space for your knowingness to flow to you. It may not happen right away. My experience is it usually doesn't happen instantly. Most of the times, it takes a little bit of time. And then I recognize that I'm in a shift. I've shifted in consciousness somehow. I have come into alignment with an expanded expression that feels more like an answer or guidance or direction. So take a deep breath in, and whatever you have going on, hold it up to the light. And we'll ask God to bless your path, helping you connect with your divine knowingness. That the angels help to bring you resourcefulness and grace and ease with a lovely, liberal sprinkling of joy and magic in service to your journey. So, my beloved friend, you just go ahead and drift off whenever you feel it flowing over you. And while you rest, your angels will watch over you and take good care of you. And I'm going to read to you and tell you a story. So for this episode, I thought I would go through the many Google books I have downloaded as I was preparing for the idea of doing a sleep podcast that Google Books has scanned, I don't know, millions of books perhaps, I don't know the number, and anything published before 1927 here in the US is now public domain. And so I've downloaded so many different books and magazines, and I'm always fascinated in reading about history when it's current events, right? It's being shared from the perspective of that moment. And one of the books I had downloaded, I don't know when I downloaded it, but it's a history of the New Thought movement by Horatio W. Dresser, published in 1919. So, New Thought wisdom, the New Thought movement, is certainly related to what we would consider the New Age movement. They are not one and the same, but there's definitely overlap. But when we think of the New Thought movement, it is the movement that wound up founding the Church of Religious Science by Mary Baker Eddy, the Science of Mind, which is now called the Center for Spiritual Living. And so I thought this would be really interesting to read together. If we make it to the second chapter of the book in this episode, they are going to be talking about Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, who is known as the founder of New Thought. So I thought before I go to the book, I would read to you from the Wikipedia about Mr. Quimby. So, he was born in 1802 and died in 1866. He was a clockmaker, a mentalist, and a mesmerist. And a mesmerist is another word for a hypnotist. His work is widely recognized as foundational to the New Thought spiritual movement. He was born in Lebanon, New Hampshire. He was one of 7 children, the son of a blacksmith and his wife. He suffered from consumption, which we now call tuberculosis, in his youth. At that point, there was no cure, and he began experimenting with his own ideas for a cure. He found that intense excitement, such as galloping on his horse, alleviated his pain for brief periods of time, and he became interested in the mind's ability to affect the body, and he claimed to have cured himself of consumption by his methods. In 1936, a gentleman named Charles Poyen came to Maine from France on an extended lecture tour in New England about mesmerism, again, hypnotism. Also, and then they say also widely known as hypnotism. Thank you. And let's see, I'm sorry, I got lost in my article. He was a French mesmerist who followed in the tradition of, and it's a very long French name, I'll do my best to pronounce it, Armand Marie Jacques de Chastenay, Marquis of Puysegur. And apologies, I'm sure I did not get that right. The McClure's Magazine 1907 biographical serial of Mary Baker Eddy, written by Willa Cather and Georgine Millamine, started the misunderstanding that Quimby was a follower of Poyen and followed him around, which is not supported by the Quimby family or Quimby's writings. In fact, Quimby wrote about 7 years later about hearing Poyen lecture. So there was, I guess, some misunderstanding about that. And so then they talk more about his life, but we're going to get to that in the book I'm going to read to you. He was married in 1927 and had 4 children. One of his sons, George, was a follower and strong defender of him, working to differentiate his work from that of Mary Baker Eddy, a patient who later founded Christian Science. So let's go on to the book. I just thought that was interesting because I hadn't heard of him before I had started reading this book. So I'm going to start by reading the preface. For several years, there has been a demand for a history of the liberal wing of the mental healing movement known as the New Thought. This demand is partly due to the fact that the movement is now well organized, with international headquarters in Washington, D.C. Hence, there is a desire to bring its leading principles together and see them in their unity, and in part, to interest in the pioneers out of whose practice the present methods and teachings have grown. The latter interest is particularly promising since the pioneers still have a message for us. Then, too, we are more interested in these days in tracing the connection between the ideas which concern us most and the new age out of which they have sprung. We realize more and more clearly that this is indeed a new age. Hence, we are increasingly eager to interpret the tendencies of thought which express the age at its best. In order to meet this desire for a history of the New Thought, Mr. James A. Edgerton, president of the International New Thought Alliance, decided in 1916 to undertake the work. For it seemed well that someone should write it who has not been identified with any particular phase of the movement, either as teacher or healer. As Mr. Edgerton was not directly acquainted with the early history and the mental healing pioneers, he asked me to write the chapters about Mr. Quimby and his followers. This I agreed to do. But then came interruptions due to the war, and the work was not begun. It has since seemed advisable that I should undertake the work as a whole, making use of such material as Mr. Edgerton had gathered. I have responded in the spirit in which the work was originally planned. This history is, in fact, the kind of book I had in mind in preparing and editing the companion volume, The Spirit of New Thought, New York, 1917, in which were published various representative essays by different writers with historical notes and a bibliography indicating the successive periods of the movement. The introduction to the latter volume defines the term, quote, New Thought, and traces its use since it was adopted in 1895 as the name of the liberal wing of the therapeutic movement. The essays give expression to divergent opinions concerning the movement, while also indicating the development of the cardinal principles. In the present volume, I have taken the definition for granted and have assumed that the reader is interested to turn directly to the history. This history might disappoint some readers if they had made up their minds that it is necessary to look into the far past and discover ideas in India, in ancient Greece, in the Middle Ages. But this venture has been tried by several writers in recent years and has led to merely general results. This interest in the past could be developed endlessly. The objection would be that there is no actual historical connection, no explanation of the modern movement. Still others have undertaken to explain the New Thought by interpreting it as an expression of the liberalism of the 19th century from a point of view so general that all the distinctive characteristics of the movement have been lost in the effort to claim too much for it. The tendency is to attribute to the New Thought far more than can with historical accuracy be claimed for it. The New Thought, as a matter of fact, is only one of many liberalizing tendencies. It may be regarded by itself, just as in other connections one might follow the history of Unitarianism, the philosophy of evolution, or the rise of Spiritism. All these studies would be interesting and valuable in their proper place. Only in recent years has the New Thought become distinctively a liberalizing movement, with churches and other organizations devoted to this work. The mental healing movement was purely special at first. It had to be to attract attention to principles and methods which needed to be recognized. The movement grew up with little connection with any other of the special movements of the age. With no desire to attribute to the mental healing movement any results which do not belong to it, I am also without desire to place more emphasis on the work of the pioneers than that work deserves in the light of its fruits. But there is certainly no reason to ignore the work of those who patiently and faithfully labored for the good of humanity. The history here narrated may be followed without indulging in controversies. The early history, especially, is based on study of the manuscripts, books, and practice with the sick of the leading therapeutists. I have enjoyed the personal acquaintance of those who aided Mr. Quimby in the more important years of his work in Portland, Maine. I was also acquainted with Reverend W. F. Evans, the first writer on the subject, and have known most of the leaders of the movement, save the newer teachers and healers. The main facts on which controversy concerning the origin of the movement might be founded were long ago published in the True History of Mental Science by Julius A. Dresser in Boston, 1887, and no one has ever been able to dispute the authenticity of these facts. Selections from Mr. Quimby's manuscripts were incorporated in The Philosophy of P. P. Quimby by Annette G. Dresser, Boston, 1895. Therefore, people have had opportunity to judge for themselves concerning the type of thought and the value of the teachings for which Mr. Quimby stood. I have since gathered the more permanent portions of these two books and added other matters of historical interest in Health and the Inner Life, published in New York, 1906. Accordingly, I have assumed in the present volume that the reader takes the true history for granted and is ready to turn to larger things. The devotee of a special interpretation of New Thought might still maintain that the historian is of a certain persuasion, and that therefore the personal equation should be taken into account. This is true, for every writer has a point of view. I must admit that after an acquaintance with the movement which dates from the years when it was known as mental science, mind cure, and the Boston craze, the teachings of the early leaders still seem more profitable. But why should a history ever be written unless we hold that there are ideas of value not yet recognized in their true worth by the world? If there are truths for the new age that surpass some of the later claims put forward in behalf of the New Thought, let us by all means try to grasp and apply these truths. This is all the more important now that mental healing is well known, now that everybody makes some use of suggestion and is familiar with the psychological principles underlying the movement. What remains to be done is to pass beyond the more popular ideas and estimate the spiritual principles, see in what sense the new thought is in very truth an expression of the new age. Therefore, the point of view of this history is that true history is analysis. It shows us what principles are most important in the light of the tendencies from which they came. It is spiritual interpretation. Those who hold this point of view have no desire to attribute power to men which belongs to God. They take no interest in claims for priority or for special teachings said to be beyond debate as if they came by revelation. What we care for is the truth which finds expression in God's own time when it is needed. If we find this truth became known without much connection with similar teachings long ago recognized in the world, there is no reason why we should not say so. Nothing is gained for a cause by claiming too much for it. The test, after all, is not history, but actual life, utility today. My part is that of the appreciative historian, not of the ardent advocate or the devotee of a special cause or organization. Consequently, I have not brought forward any views of my own. So that is some lovely insight to the author of this book. So we're not going to Mr. Quimby just yet, but we're going to start now with the first chapter, The New Thought Movement, Chapter 1, The New Age. So the Great War came as a vivid reminder that we live in a new age. We began to look back not only to explain the war and find a way to bring it to an end, but to see what tendencies were in process to lead us far beyond it. There were new issues to be met, and we needed the new enlightenment to meet them. The war was only one of various signs of a new dispensation. It came not so much to prepare the way as to call attention to truths which we already possessed. The new age had been in process for some time. Different ones of us were trying to show in what way it was a new dispensation, what principles were most needed. What the war accomplished for us was to give us new contrast. Wow, that's really powerful. What the war accomplished for us was to give us new contrast. And certainly we have been living through such a time. This is a conversation I have so often in my classes and with friends. The contrast between some of the shadow energy that is present in the world versus the light we're trying to bring in. So as a result, we now see clearly that some of the tendencies of the 19th century, which were most warmly praised, are not so promising as we supposed. We had come to regard the 19th century as the age of special sciences. We looked to science for enlightenment. We enjoyed new inventions without number, such as the steam engine, the electric telegraph, the telephone, and our life centered more and more about these. But the nation, having to do with preparation for the war, was the one which made the greatest use of special sciences. Modern science was in fact materialized for the benefit of a military party. As a result of our study of the war, many of us are now more interested in higher branches of knowledge than in the special sciences. We insist that science is for use, and we reserve the right to say what that use shall be. We have lost interest in science not explicitly employed for moral ends. Again, we call attention to the 19th century with great pride as the age of the philosophy of evolution. We put our hopes in that philosophy. We expected it to explain the great mysteries. We wrote history anew. We issued new textbooks, and in 1,000 ways adapted our thoughts to the great idea of gradual development. But while the new philosophy accomplished wonders for us insofar as it showed the reign of law, the uniformity of nature, the immanence of all causality, it deprived us in our former belief in the divine purpose. Taken literally, it led us to regard nature as self-operative. We had to work our way back to the divine providence. We realized that evolutionism was simply a new form of materialism. We carried forward from the 19th century into the 20th century many great problems of life and mind not yet solved. The philosophy of evolution has come to stay, but not even in the form of Bergson's interpretation is it satisfactory. Isn't this interesting to listen to him write about the perspective of what happened in the 19th century from his perspective in 1919? We also looked upon the 19th century as the period of development of idealism. The modern movement, beginning in Germany, spread to England and the United States, and we witnessed a most interesting form of it in our transcendentalism. I should be able to say that easier than I did, but we're just going to move on ahead. This movement, in brief, emphasized thought as the cardinal principle. It sought to explain all things by reference with this thought, capital T. It found the starting point as well as the meaning of the idea with a capital I. The outward world was regarded as a mere phenomenon in comparison. This movement had permanent contributions to make to our thought. We associate the name of Emerson with its spiritual meanings, but most of its theoretical teachings seem far removed from our practical thought today. We no longer try to spin the world out of the mere web of thought. We need a new idealism to replace that of Fichte, Fichte, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, and Hegel, Hegel. We are suspicious of mere speculation. The idealism of the last century is already mere matter of history. The 19th century was also the epoch of the religious liberalism. Throughout the century, Unitarianism accomplished a great work. The liberalizing tendencies spread into all denominations. We take many ideas as matters of course nowadays, for which the great leaders of time of Theodore Parker and James Martineau had to contend at the risk of intellectual martyrdom. The liberalism of the early part of the century had a destructive work to do before the freer thought of the day could assimilate the teachings of modern science and give us our present constructive faith. It requires decided effort on our part today to put ourselves back to the time when narrowing dogmas still ruled the human mind, when it was customary to pray for divine intervention, to believe in miracles as infractions of law, and to draw lines of rigid exclusiveness around the ecclesiastical sect to which one happened to belong. The history of liberalism is so comprehensive that it is always a question nowadays what we mean when we use the term to be liberal is to be of the New Age. The real question is, what is the goal of liberalism? The answer, which a disciple of the New Thought would give, should be understood in the light of a long struggle for the right to employ mental healing, a struggle which went on almost apart, independently of the warfare waged by Unitarianism upon the old doctrines and dogmas. As in the case of the philosophy of evolution, we have had religious liberalism long enough with us to realize that it has a sting to it. For the less enlightened, the smaller minds among liberals, freedom of religious thought developed according to the tenets of the new or higher criticism imported by Germany. undertaking to explain how the Bible came into being with the variations and errors of texts, the imperfections of language, the conflict of opinions due to the fact that the books of which the Bible consists were brought together by other hands long after the supposed writers flourished, the critics proved too much and exemplified a habit of judging by the letter. Biblical criticism became destructive and had much to do with the weakening of faith still apparent among us. If we say that the New Age is the epoch of belief in the spiritual meaning of the Scriptures, we must qualify it by saying that the greater work remains to be done. Devotees of the New Thought have freely interpreted the Bible for themselves. What is needed is a spiritual science of interpretation to offset the destructive work which the age accepted without knowing what it believed. This is a fascinating perspective. Let's see, how much longer is this particular paragraph? Oh, we got a little ways to go. Okay, well, and you know what? This is fascinating and a little bit boring, which is great if you're trying to sleep. So, oh wait, where did I leave off? Okay, here we go. Sorry, I'm really getting into this. And this is interesting to read out loud. I think this is the kind of thing that if I were just scanning to read, I don't know that I would get as much out of it. But it's really interesting to contemplate the birth of new thought in contrast to much of the hardcore religions of the day. So I'm going to keep going. The great century that has passed also witnessed the coming of Spiritism in its modern form. In retrospect, we are now able to say that behind all that was misleading in the new movement, there were certain great truths which the world needed. Old ideas of death have been overcome, the spiritual world has been brought nearer, and larger views of the human spirit have been generally accepted. Out of the new interest came psychical research as an endeavor to put the phenomena of the whole field of Spiritism on a scientific basis. The results have been meager and slowly attained, but the movement has been educational. Its positive results are discoverable in what we have been led to think. Although the whole field lies somewhat apart from that of the new thought, the mental healing movement has profited by it. Spiritualism is a protest against the materialism of the 19th century. It is one of the signs of the times. We have been gradually coming to know what spirit return means, what a genuine message from the other life would be. What we want is a better philosophy than that which psychical experiences ordinarily seem to imply. Psychology, in the sense in which we now employ the term, did not exist when the New Thought movement began. We are now so accustomed to the psychological point of view of every subject of public interest that we forget how recent it is. Modern science in general had to come first, then the theory of evolution with the attempt to explain mental life on a biological basis, and the gradual transfer of interest to the inner life. The term, quote, suggestion, quote, subconscious, and other words which we employ so freely are very new indeed. The old intellectualism in psychology prevailed for the most part throughout the 19th century. When a psychological laboratory was established at last, it was in behalf of a psychological point of view, and like many other theories imported from Germany, we have still to estimate the psychological theory in its true estate. In the end, it may seem as far from the truth as the idealism and criticism which we are in process of examining anew. If psychology is a sign of the times, we may well remind ourselves that the end is not yet. for there are many rivals in the field. The implied psychology of the new thought is essentially practical and decidedly unlike that mental science which holds that the inner life is wholly determined by the brain. For the devotee of mental healing, the mind is what actual success seems to prove it to be in the endeavor of the soul to conquer circumstance. It is well to study the history of mental healing without regard to the psychology of the laboratories. The New Age began in part as a reaction against authority in favor of individualism and the right to test belief by personal experience. Ooh, that's so powerful. That is absolutely my experience, right? So let me just read that sentence again. The New Age began in part as a reaction against authority in favor of individualism and the right to test belief by personal experience. By acquiring the right to think for himself or herself or themself, I'm adding in the pronouns, in religious matters, people also gained freedom to live according to their convictions. And he actually uses man and his, but I am up-leveling this a little bit. People also gained freedom to live according to their convictions. Inner experience came into its own as the means of testing even the most exclusive teachings of the Church. The seat of authority was found by some in human reason, by others in what the Quakers call the inward light. Thus, inner guidance led the way to another and more spiritual phase of liberalism. The Emersonian idea of self-reliance is an expression of this faith in the light, which shines for the individual within the sanctuary of the soul. Ooh, I love that. I'll read that one once more. The Emersonian idea of self-reliance is an expression of this faith in the light, which shines for the individual within the sanctuary of the soul. After the mental healing movement had been in process for half a century, its devotees saw in Emerson a prophet of the ideas for which they had been laboring in their own way, each within the sphere of his or her or their experience. This emphasis on inner experience is a sign of our age, but it took us a long while to read the signs. Now that we have passed into the social period, we are able to appreciate the individualism of the 19th century. It was, of course, necessary for man to win the right to think for himself. I'm not going to adapt everything. I'm just going to keep reading at this point. To test matters for himself and to become aware of his subjective life in contrast with the objective. Man had to plead for salvation as the individual's privilege. He was eager to prove that the individual survived death, that a spirit could return and establish its identity. He also had to contend for the freedom of the individual in contrast with the tendency of evolutionism to regard man as a product of heredity and environment. Our whole modern view of success has grown up around a new conception of the individual. We have pleaded for man, the individual, in manifold ways since the modern science made us acquainted with the theory of physical force, its laws, processes, and conditions. But in the 20th century, we have taken a long step beyond the individualism with which the modern liberal movement began. The present is the dawning age of brotherhood. It marks an advance not only beyond the theoretical idealism, which emphasized thought as the only reality, but beyond all types of theory in which stress is placed upon the subjective. We have come out into the open again after the age-long endeavor to acquaint man with the inner life. We penetrate the inner world to gain new insights, to acquire the psychological point of view, to discover the psychical, to learn about suggestion and the subconscious. We had to learn that all real development is from within outward according to law. Today we are engaged in applying our new discoveries. The history of the new thought is for the most part the record of one of several contemporaneous movements in favor of the inner life and the individual. We can understand it now because our age has given us the contrast. To follow that history intelligently is to see it in an effort for knowledge and power, which we now take as a matter of course. Each of us has, in a measure, come to hold the present social point of view, because those who went before earned for us the right to individual salvation, gave us the inner point of view. It was the war more than any other event of our century which gave us the contrast through which we now understand the subjectivism of the 19th century. The war made us aware that we had traveled very far. It showed us the widespread social tendency of our age. It was the greatest objective social struggle the world has witnessed. For never was the autocrat, the mere individual, so effectively organized as in this last war of the kings. Yet never was there such a social protest against every right which the mere individual takes unto himself in his effort to impose his ideas in the world. As a result, we now see plainly that all true peace is social. Our nation was brought out of its isolation into prominence as a world power to secure this larger, lasting peace. As a result, we realize that justice is social. We are all pondering over the nature of social justice. We are aware that this is the great issue now, that we have turned from war and an external enterprise to interpret the warfare of the classes. We are pleading for moral and spiritual considerations as eagerly as before. But we see that, strictly speaking, the moral and spiritual are neither subjective nor objective. They are social. Hence we look for every clue that points towards cooperation and brotherhood. We are passing beyond the old competitive spirit. The nations have been brought close by working for a common end. Never before has the world witnessed such a sense of service. Wow, it's a lot to take in, right? Especially from this perspective, with not knowing what was coming in another decade or two. So we'll finish this up, but a little more. This growing awareness of the intimacy of relationship of the individual with society has increased with us in line with the newer thought of God as immanent in the world, as the resident cause of all evolution. Our thought of God has become practical, concrete. This newer conception of God also belongs with the desire of the modern man to test everything for himself, to feel in his own life whatever man claims to have felt in the past that exalted him. Thus, the practice of the presence of God follows as a natural consequence of the newer idea of man. The liberalism which set man free from the old theology left him free where he could turn up to all the first-hand sources of religion for himself. In a practical sense of the word, we may say that the New Age is witnessing a return to the original Christianity of the Gospels. The great work of religious liberalism in the 19th century consisted in freeing the world of theologies which we need never have believed. The war has brought us to a point where we can begin to appreciate what kind of social reform Christianity would have ushered in if it had been tried. The original teaching was social in the larger, truer sense. It called for brotherhood. It came to establish peace. It came that all men might have life and have it more abundantly. The spirit of the new age counsels us to return to the Bible as the book of life. It assures us anew that which is spiritual must be spiritually discerned. It puts the emphasis on conduct of the life. It puts the emphasis on conduct, on the life. Yes. It came to minister to the whole individual. Only through social salvation can we begin to attain its fullness. Okay, well, that seems like a good place to stop. Because there is still a lot more to read in that chapter, but we're just going to complete there. I will read the chapter on Mr. Quimby to you soon, though. I have found a tremendous amount of comfort and insight from the New Thought community. Specifically, my most profound experiences have come from attending Agape Spiritual Center when I lived in Los Angeles with Reverend Michael Beckwith. And his teachings and the teachings of New Thought and the energy and the positivity and the shift in how to hold things in consciousness were so profound for me. And that blended with what I was learning at the University of Santa Monica definitely immersed me in New Thought, not from a Christian perspective, but more from a Unitarian one, because I'm Jewish, so I still consider myself Jewish. Not necessarily religiously so, but this idea of New Thought and this very personal, intimate connection with God, with the divine, to live a life of service, of social connection, instead of following dogmatic teachings, has been life-changing for me. And I find it fascinating to read about the perspective of the development of New Thought from the author's insights from the world as it was in 1919, right? To hear about when the theories of evolution came, and liberalism, individualism, psychology, all of these things were converging to shift how people were contemplating their own existence and experience of the world. It's fascinating. So I hope you enjoyed this. Or maybe you found this so boring it was easy to go to sleep. So in one way or another, I hope this served you. And I'm grateful for our time together. And I look forward to sharing with you again soon. So, my beautiful friend, I send you love. I send you gratitude. I send you prayers for the sweetest of dreams. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you.